You were taught to believe that changing your reality requires struggle, years of effort, and complex techniques. Conditioned by a collective mindset, you learn to value sacrifice as if it were the only key to transformation, believing that only constant suffering could validate your path. But what if this narrative were just a veil, an illusion designed to keep your identity trapped in old timelines? What you call failure might just be the quantum void trying to reposition you. What you call silence might be the secret password to cross invisible dimensions. What seems like stagnation might just be the collapse of an identity that can no longer sustain the vibration of what you are becoming. Think about the moments when everything stopped making sense, when doors suddenly closed, when people moved away without explanation, when your carefully laid plans crumbled like sand slipping through your fingers. You believed you had failed, that you had lost. But what if, in reality, you had just been led to the field where everything is born? The quantum void is not the end. It is the invisible portal. It is the space between identities, between timelines, between vibrational states. It is not absence, but potential. It is not empty, but the silent gestation of a new reality. It is in the apparent nothingness that everything begins to be generated. You feel fear because the ego cannot find references to hold on to. Without the external signals that have always fed its narrative, it screams in despair. But the void is not a threat, it is an opportunity. It is an invitation to release control, to let go of the obsession to fill every space with effort, and to allow the field to reveal what was already written in the frequency, in the space where nothing seems to be happening. Everything is happening in silence. Silence is the language of the vacuum. The pause is the code of transition. It is like the deep night that precedes the dawn, like the suspended breath before a dive, like the instant when a musician raises their hands, and, in the silence that seems empty, the whole orchestra is already about to be born into sound. What you need to understand is that this moment is not a mistake, not a failure, not a punishment. It is the field repositioning you. It is the old timeline falling apart because it can no longer sustain the frequency you now embody. It is the future calling, even if it is still invisible. You did not get here by chance. This video is a call for you to recognize that the void is the sign, not the condemnation, for you to realize that collapse is not destruction, but transition, that the pause is sacred, that silence is the portal. And here, now, in the face of this message, you are invited to cross over not with struggle, not with exhausting techniques, but with vibrational consciousness. To understand that the field does not respond to an excess of action, but to the coherent state of who you already are. This is not common content. It is a summons. In the next stages of this journey, you will be guided to see the void as the invisible portal, to dissolve the old identity, to sustain the real frequency that the field recognizes. You will learn to remain in the corridor between worlds without yielding to fear until the new reality reveals itself before you. Get ready, because what seemed like silence will reveal itself as music. What seemed like a void will reveal itself as a birth. And what seemed like failure will reveal itself as a quantum repositioning. You were conditioned to believe that the more difficult, the more valid, the more painful, the more true, the more complex, the more spiritual. The collective mind has erected an altar to excessive effort, as if evolution were a conquest won through endless struggle. This mindset created an invisible prison, where suffering became the currency for acceptance and identity. But the quantum truth is different. The field does not open because you have accumulated techniques, formulas, and hidden secrets. The field does not respond to the number of hours you dedicate to manipulating results. The field responds to what you vibrate, to what you sustain in coherence within yourself. And this is where the ego despairs, because its whole narrative is based on struggle, on the story of I conquered with effort, I proved my worth, I suffered, and because of that, I deserve it. Excessive effort turns into noise. Imagine trying to tune in to a radio station and, instead of hearing the music, you only hear static because there is too much interference. This is what happens when your energy is saturated with attempts, with anxious movements, with strategies that come from the mind and not from the frequency. The more you squeeze water between your fingers, the faster it escapes. The more you force the field, the more it moves away, because your vibration becomes incoherent with what you wish to manifest. The glorification of complexity is just the most sophisticated face of the same deception. You were led to believe that you need intricate rituals, endless practices, secret methods, and instructions that seem impossible to fulfill to deserve access to the leap. This complexity seduces the ego, because the more difficult it seems, the more it validates the idea that I am doing something great, I am special because I suffer more than others. But in the quantum field, greatness is not in the weight of the journey, but in the lightness of the frequency. The quantum void is not revealed through effort but through coherence. The leap does not open because you have mastered all the hidden secrets, but because you have silenced the noise and sustained the real vibration. It is not about ignoring discipline or rejecting learning, but about understanding that true discipline is vibrational, not mechanical. Real learning is expanding presence, not accumulating information. Effort is born of resistance. It is the ego's movement trying to control what is already beyond its capacity to control. It is the anxiety of filling the silence with action, of decorating the void with techniques, of occupying the space with noise. But the field is not impressed with your tiredness. It does not reward those who suffer more. It responds to those who vibrate with coherence. The glorification of complexity is, at its core, a disguise for fleeing from simplicity. Simplicity is frightening because it offers no crutches to the ego. Simplicity requires vibrational faith, not justifications. Simplicity is a mirror that says, you already are, but you need to sustain this with presence. And this is the truth that the ego fears, that there is nothing more to conquer with sweat, only to reveal with frequency. Therefore, excessive effort is noise, and complexity is a distraction. Both move you away from the portal. Both trap you in the cycle of the old identity. What truly opens the leap is not doing much, but being much. It is sustaining, even in silence, the vibration of the reality that already pulses within you. Here is the revelation. The field does not read your external movements, it reads your internal signature. It does not respond to your agenda, but to your vibrational state. It does not matter how many times you try to push the walls of the invisible with effort. What moves the timeline is the alignment with what you already are in the silence of the vacuum. The quantum void is not an absence, it is potential. It is the invisible space between identities, the corridor between timelines, the silence between frequencies. To the ego, which is used to defining itself by forms, the void seems like a threatening abyss. But, in reality, it is the fertile ground where the seeds of a new reality germinate in silence. The void is not the end. It is the portal. When you arrive in this space, nothing external seems to hold up. What once made sense loses its luster. People, places, and even old dreams seem to dissolve. It's as if life has hit the pause button, leaving you suspended in the invisible. The ego screams, trying to interpret this state as failure, as abandonment, as proof that everything is lost. But the field whispers, this is where creation begins. The void generates fear because it removes visible supports. The ego, without its external references, feels like someone floating without ground. But this is precisely the password. The void deprograms old patterns, worn-out vibrations, narratives that no longer correspond to what you have become. It is in this space that the noises dissolve, clearing the way for the real frequency. Notice, there is no threat in the void. What exists is an invitation to stay, to not run in search of distractions, to not compulsively fill the silence. The void is a test of presence. It asks, Are you able to sustain your identity without external validation? Do you trust the invisible field more than what your eyes can see? Simplicity is the key that opens this portal. The ego looks for complex answers, complicated methods, grandiose explanations. But the void is revealed through stillness. It is in the space where nothing seems to be happening that everything is being born. It is like the seed under the ground, invisible on the surface, but already carrying within it the code of the entire tree. The invisible is always the cradle of the visible. The quantum void is also the interval between musical notes. Imagine a melody without pauses. It would be just a confusing noise. What gives meaning to the music is the silence between the sounds. In the same way, the void gives meaning to the leap, because within it is the code that prepares the manifestation. The void is the silence before the orchestra begins, and it is here that you are called to invert the logic. Instead of fearing the silence, embrace it. Instead of fleeing from absence, recognize it as an invisible presence. Instead of labeling the void as a loss, see it as the secret code of creation. The portal does not open through effort, but through surrender to what seems to be nothing, but which contains everything. Remember, the field does not communicate with noise, but with stable vibration. The void is the opportunity to align your frequency, to clear the noise, to silence the ego's narratives. It is in the nothingness that everything finds space to be born. And at this point in the journey, you already realize the void is not a threat, but a password. The invisible portal is before you, waiting only for you to cease the noise, sustain the presence, and cross over. Before we continue, if this video is being helpful to you, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and comment below. In doing so, you strengthen this frequency and help this message reach others who are also crossing the void. Before every quantum leap, there is an inevitable moment, the collapse of the old identity. The frequency that sustained who you were begins to fall apart, and with it, narratives, beliefs, and patterns that seemed unshakable crumble. It is a process that the ego interprets as death, but which the field reveals as rebirth. What falls apart is not you, it is just the version that can no longer cross the portal. The ego reacts with panic. It says, "You are failing, you are losing everything, you are regressing." It creates stories of failure to cling to what little remains of its references. But observe, this panic is not the truth. It is just the cry of a frequency that is being switched off. It is like changing the station on the radio. Before capturing the new music, you always pass through the static. This noise is not the end, it is the transition. The collapse of the old identity can manifest in various ways. Relationships that seemed solid fall apart. Carefully constructed plans lose their meaning. Intense emotions emerge, bringing to the surface old wounds that you thought you had overcome. You feel as if you are in an internal earthquake, where everything that seemed fixed begins to move. But this instability is not a setback. It is deprogramming. It is the field dissolving what no longer sustains the new vibration. In the midst of this process, the temptation is to cling even more to the old. You try to save what is crumbling. You try to rebuild on the same foundations. You try to hold on to the identity that is dissolving. But each attempt increases the feeling of emptiness, because the new reality cannot be born in old structures. It is like trying to blow life into ashes. The fire has already gone out, and what remains is just the invitation to clear space for the new. The crisis that you interpret as a fall can be, in fact, the code of the leap. The chaos is just the sign that the old no longer holds up. The pain you feel is not punishment, it is childbirth. And as in every birth, there are contractions, there is pressure, there is rupture. But the rupture is not destruction, it is passage. This moment is a call to reinterpret your own experience. When something falls apart, instead of asking, "Why did I lose?" you can ask, "What in me no longer belongs to the frequency I'm entering?" When the ego screams, "It's all over," You can affirm, the old has collapsed because the new has already been born in the invisible. This shift in perception transforms chaos into a password. The collapse of the old identity is therefore the biggest sign that you are about to cross over. Do not fight against it. Do not interpret it as a failure. Recognize it as the last act of the identity that fulfilled its role and now needs to be dissolved. Remember, you are not what is crumbling. You are the space that remains. You are not the narrative that is falling apart, but the presence that observes and crosses over. The collapse is just the cleaning that prepares the ground for the real frequency that already pulses within you. Just as the night seems darkest before the dawn, your identity seems most fragile before the awakening. But it is in this instant that the field whispers, "Do not fear. What fell apart was just the shell. What is born now is the essence." When you understand this, you will no longer see collapse as a loss, but as a liberation. You will no longer see chaos as a threat, but as a portal. You will no longer see crisis as a failure, but as the dissolution of what was never permanent. And in this understanding, you cross over with less resistance and more presence, allowing the leap to reveal itself naturally. The quantum awakening is not marked by complex techniques, nor by practices that require superhuman effort. It manifests through internal, silent, and simple abilities, but with a strength capable of reconfiguring the entire field. These abilities are not external conquests, but vibrational states that you learn to sustain, even when the world around you seems to be moving in the opposite direction. The first ability is real-time self-awareness. It is about observing your thoughts the instant they arise, without judgment and without the need to control them. When you become a witness to your own mind, you interrupt the automatic cycle that keeps old frequencies active. This simple presence, this act of observing instead of reacting, is already enough to collapse old timelines and open up space for vibrational coherence. The second ability is radical responsibility. The field does not just reflect what you mentally desire, but what you embody in your identity. Desiring prosperity while vibrating scarcity does not create abundance. Desiring love while vibrating rejection does not create connection. Radical responsibility is assuming that everything that manifests in your reality is a response to your current frequency, and not just to your conscious requests. When you understand this, you stop blaming the external and start realigning the internal. Vasami E. Third ability is caring for internal states. Sustaining a vibration does not mean living without challenges or dense emotions, but it means not allowing these momentary waves to become your permanent energetic signature. It is remaining in the chosen vibration, even when there is no external validation, even when nothing in the world seems to confirm your choice. The field reads what you sustain in silence, not what you state out loud. The fourth ability is detachment from interpretation. The ego labels every collapse as a failure, every silence as abandonment, every pause as a defeat. But those who awaken know that these labels are just distortions. The collapse can be the sign of the leap, the silence can be the portal, the absence can be the password. When you detach from interpreting the experience as positive or negative and simply cross through it in presence, you free the field to reorganize reality without the interference of your fear. These abilities are not learned from books or accumulated as techniques. They are vibrational trainings. They are states cultivated day by day in the simplest situations. Observing your mind when it tries to justify anxiety. Taking responsibility when everything in you wants to blame the external. Sustaining the chosen vibration even in the face of a lack of signs. Not interpreting collapses as an end, but as a transition. The quantum awakening, therefore, is not about adding layers of complexity to your journey. It is about removing the layers that cover up simplicity. It is about learning to remain in what is, without fleeing to distractions, without getting lost in narratives of effort, without clinging to the ego's justifications. These abilities, when practiced, become the portal itself. They make you not just someone who seeks the leap, but someone who already vibrates the frequency of the leap. And, in this state, the field responds naturally, because it recognizes in you not the mental intention to change, but the coherent identity that already lives the new reality. With these abilities, you learn that awakening is not a future conquest, but a present activation. It does not happen when all external conditions align, but when your internal frequency already becomes the alignment itself. It is at this moment that the field bends, that the timeline reconfigures, that reality bends before what you are. And so, the quantum awakening ceases to be a distant promise and becomes an embodied experience. You do not just seek change, you become the change. There is a sacred instant in your journey where the past no longer serves, but the future has not yet materialized. It is like walking on a suspended bridge between two worlds. Behind you, the old has dissolved. Before you, the new has not yet been revealed. This state is what many call disorientation, emptiness, or even despair. But, in reality, it is the most delicate and decisive moment of the quantum leap, the moment before the turning point. In this space, you feel as if you are floating without ground. Old references no longer offer security, and the signs of the future have not yet manifested. It is common to experience fatigue, confusion, a sense of losing direction, as if you were living in a narrow and silent corridor. But this corridor is not a mistake. It is the vibrational womb where the new identity is being formed. The ego, unable to bear the emptiness, tries to interpret this state as failure. It says, "You have lost everything. You are stuck. Nothing is happening." It seeks to fill the silence with haste, to force results, to run back to old structures. But this haste is the trap. This impulse to forcefully fill is what delays the manifestation of the new, because the corridor between realities can only be crossed in presence, not in despair. The moment before the turning point is similar to the dark night that precedes the dawn. During the deepest hours of the morning, the world seems motionless, cold, silent, but it is at this very instant that the sun is already preparing to rise. It is like the silence before the music begins, when every heart waits in anticipation for the first note. It is like the suspended breath before the dive, when the body prepares to cross the unknown. This space should not be filled, it should be inhabited. It is the test of trust. It asks, are you capable of sustaining the vibration of the new reality, even without external signs? Do you trust the invisible field more than your need for control? This is the initiation. The corridor between worlds is not a punishment, it is vibrational training. And it is in this training that you learn to remain present even when there is no validation, to remain in coherence even when the mind seeks justifications, to remain in silence even when the ego screams, to remain in trust even when everything seems suspended. It is this permanence that opens the turning point. The moment before the turning point is also a space of purification. It reveals the last remnants of the old identity, the hidden attachments, the subtle narratives that still hold you to the old cycle. If you try to flee from this process, you end up prolonging the void. But if you accept the invitation, the corridor transforms into a portal. And then, almost without warning, the turning point happens. The field reorganizes. The timeline bends. The new begins to materialize with the same naturalness with which the dawn breaks the darkness. What seemed like an absence reveals itself as abundance. What seemed like silence reveals itself as music. What seemed like a void reveals itself as a birth. Know this: the moment before the turning point is not a punishment. It is a privilege. Few have the courage to remain in this corridor without trying to escape. Few can bear the absence of signs without giving up. But those who remain discover that this state is, in fact, the seal of someone who is ready to cross over. Therefore, do not fear the void between worlds. It is the womb of the new. It is the pause that precedes the song. It is the corridor that leads you to the awakening. If you learn to inhabit it in trust, you will discover that the silence that seemed like an absence was, in fact, the secret language of the field announcing, the turning point has already begun. In the quantum field, it is not your isolated mental intention that creates, but the frequency you sustain in coherence. The field does not just read what you say. It does not simply respond to what you desire. It responds to what you are. It captures your vibrational signature like an invisible beacon and shapes reality according to this constant emission. That is why desiring something is not enough. You can repeat affirmations every day. You can write goals in a notebook. You can intensely visualize scenarios. But if your identity still vibrates in the frequency of fear, scarcity, rejection, it is this vibration that the field will recognize. The field is not moved by words, but by coherence. Coherence means alignment between mind, emotion, and state. It is not enough to think about abundance while you feel anxiety. It is not enough to declare love while you vibrate neediness. It is not enough to talk about confidence while you sustain despair. The field is not impressed with disconnected declarations. It responds to the stable state you can sustain, even when there is no external validation. The difference between desiring and embodying is like the difference between dreaming of a melody and being the tuned instrument itself. Desire plays a loose note. The coherent identity becomes the whole song. The field responds not to fragmented intention, but to the complete music of your vibration. This does not mean perfection. Coherence does not require you to never feel fear, never be confused, never be misaligned. Coherence only requires stable presence, the ability to return, to choose again, to sustain the chosen vibration despite temporary oscillations. It is like keeping a flame lit, even when the wind blows. It may waver, but it does not go out. When you embody the real frequency, the field responds naturally. There is no excessive effort, no need to force results. Reality bends before the vibration that you are. What seemed distant gets closer, not because you chase it, but because you have become magnetic to what you already carry within you. It is at this point that the quantum awakening reveals itself, not as a conquest, but as resonance. You do not run after abundance. You vibrate abundance, and abundance responds. You do not beg for love. You vibrate love, and love manifests. You do not ask for freedom. You vibrate freedom, and reality organizes itself around that state. The real frequency is the invisible signature that guides your timelines. Every choice of vibration, every sustained state, every conscious presence is a code sent to the field. And the field responds with precision because it cannot be deceived. It does not read speeches, it reads coherence. Therefore, the call now is for you to stop getting lost on the surface of desires and to dive into the depth of identity. Who are you when no one is looking? What do you vibrate when there is no audience? What state do you sustain in silence? These are the questions that reveal your real frequency. And here is the revelation. The field is not judging you. It does not reward or punish. It just mirrors. It returns in matter the vibration you offer. It is simple, direct, and fair. Therefore, your responsibility is not to control the external, but to sustain the internal. Your task is not to manipulate results, but to embody coherence. When you understand this, your life changes. You stop running, stop fighting, stop glorifying effort. You realize that the leap does not depend on complex techniques, but on the simplicity of vibrational coherence. And by living in this real frequency, you become the very portal that attracts and manifests the new line of reality. We have reached the point where everything aligns. The void, the collapse, the weight, and the real frequency. Now is the moment of the summons. It is here that you recognize that what seemed like failure was a portal, that what seemed like a loss was a repositioning, that what seemed like silence was the language of the field announcing the birth of the new. Listen carefully. The void is not a failure. It is the invisible portal where the old reality dissolves and the new begins to pulse. The collapse of identity is not a setback, but a liberation. The dark night is not an end, but a prelude to dawn. You have been led here to understand that you no longer need to fight against the silence. You no longer need to fear the nothing. You no longer need to flee from the void. It is your password. The field is ready to respond, but it does not respond to loose words or scattered intentions. It responds to your vibrational signature. It reads who you are. And that is why the summons now is not for you to desire, but for you to embody. It is not for you to ask, but for you to sustain. It is not for you to run, but for you to remain. Declare in presence. I am the void that creates. This phrase is not a metaphor. It is an anchoring. It is the reminder that, in the space where nothing seems to be happening, everything is already being born. It is the seal of your trust in the field, the choice to cross over not with effort, but with coherence. This is the moment to embrace silence as an ally, to recognize the void as the vibrational womb of your new identity, to walk without haste, without anxiety, without the need to fill every space with noise. This is the moment to breathe like one who has already crossed over, to live like one who already vibrates on the new timeline, to sustain your presence like one who already knows that the field has responded. Now, the summons expands. You are not alone. Every person who vibrates in this frequency strengthens the collective field of awakening. Every comment, every word, every gesture of alignment creates a wave that resonates beyond you. Therefore, leave a record below as a vibrational anchoring. I am the void that creates. By writing this, you do not just comment on a video, you consolidate the frequency within yourself and send this code to the field. And more. Before ending, receive this direct call. If this message resonated with you, if you recognize the portal in the void, if you realize that the silence was not the end, but the beginning, then subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and comment. Not for simple engagement, but because every act here is a way of saying to the field, I align with this frequency. Every subscription, every comment, every gesture becomes an echo that amplifies the resonance of this message and causes more consciousnesses to awaken with you. Leave this video not just inspired, but repositioned. Walk as one who already vibrates the new reality. Breathe as one who has already crossed over. Look around not with the anxiety of seeking signs, but with the serenity of one who knows. The field has already responded. Live as one who has already embodied the identity that the leap has revealed. And when the ego tries to say that nothing has changed, remember, the portal does not open in noise, but in silence. Change does not happen in haste, but in permanence. The leap is not conquered by struggle, but received by coherence. You already are. You have already crossed over. You already vibrate. The void is not an absence, it is creation. And now, your summons is to live each day as one who sustains this truth. Declare once more, I am the void that creates. And may your presence resonate like a beacon, opening paths not only for you, but for all who are ready to awaken.